Good afternoon. I want to thank DEIS Impact and Marcy and Cindy and Susan and everybody else that's brought us together this afternoon. My talk is on the first DEIS Impact keynote speaker, Ruth Messinger, who at that time was president of the American Jewish World Service. She stepped down just last year from that position, but is still an ambassador of goodwill throughout the world. In her keynote to the DEIS Impact program in 2012, Ruth gave an overview of the challenges facing developing societies and how AJWS programs are making a difference. She spoke of the organization's aim to be a pivotal force on the ground, she said, to end poverty and extend human rights. She reminded us of the different life experience of most people in the U.S. with those with whom AJWS works in poor nations. She spoke of the interconnectedness of foreign and economic policies that at times conflicted with the great human development and human rights challenges abroad. So I'd like to break right now to show the short clip of Ruth at that first keynote.
Globally, we are a pivotal force on the ground in countries in the developing world where we have found grassroots projects that are being conceived of and run by local people who have their own vision of justice. And what we do is find the best of them and help them to pursue that vision. They might be operating a microfinance program. They might be working, and I talked to someone about this earlier this evening, informally, on and against issues of sex trafficking. Many of them are working to improve agricultural sustainability, and I'm going to say a lot about agriculture work during the course of my remarks, but they are in countries that have huge challenges, and that's a piece of what I want to be sure that is in your mind. Some of you may choose to work on social justice in a particular area of Waltham, Massachusetts. Some of you may choose to work on some of the many complex and challenging issues that exist for sure in this country. But I do need you to hear me say that the way in which easily 40% of the world lives, except for those of you who come from some of those countries or have for one reason or another traveled to and spent time in those countries, is outside the immediate purview and understanding and grasp of most of us. And that is partly because, and feel free to ask me questions about this later, but even in university, but certainly in the American media, there is an assumption that Americans really don't want as much bad news as there is in the world.
So 5 years have passed since Ruth gave that talk, and the issues she raised are even more pressing today, I would suggest, than as we anticipate the changing impact of U.S. policies in the next 4 or even more years. On the domestic front, I would draw your attention to the terrible vulnerability among American families. In May of 2016, the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System released a report called The Economic Well-Being of U.S. Households in 2015, which found that 46% of adults say they either could not cover an emergency expense costing $400 or would cover it by selling something or borrowing money. We are not a so-called developing country, but surely we are a rich country desperate for a redistribution of wealth and opportunity. Internationally, much good has been done by the United States through its international aid organizations. Their best work, in my opinion, I think Ruth would agree with this, has always been funding research into such things as diarrheal diseases, or in helping to solve problems in nutrition or agricultural productivity. Yet most development is dependent on building local capacity to analyze and solve development problems. But most development also is often compromised by adherence to rigid ideologies from the donors. Development should encourage experimentation with novel economic formations and with their smooth interaction with global economic institutions. Yet often neo-colonial attitudes still exist toward low and middle income nations, and aid programs out of harmony with the culture and social values of other societies. For instance, the European notion of the nation state in much of sub-Saharan Africa, I think, is largely a failed effort of colonial powers that tried to impose European structure on societies they neither understood nor respected any more than the early colonists to America understood land use systems of Native Americans. In contrast, thoughtful development in Africa might have shored up traditional governance with what Julius Nyerere, the great statesman of Tanzania some years ago, called ujamaa, the traditional familyhood of shared social and economic wealth within the insularity of tribal villages. AJWS, like Oxfam America and a few other American international NGOs, does not seek United States government funding. It has and must remain financially and politically independent, AJWS would say, to act upon its values and to follow its moral compass. This is essential, for a social pathology is present in all societies that permit the coexistence of endemic poverty and the obscene accumulation of wealth. When I was president, the first president of American Jewish World Service, I worked, for instance, on the southern Philippine island of Negros, and the situation I will describe is still there, where the children of thousands of sugar plantation workers suffered what they called the sweet sickness, the creeping malnutrition during the 6 months each year when the workers received no wages. The landowners, all Filipino, lived as feudal lords, and through their generosity gave child-sized coffins to the victims of the sweet sickness. This is social pathology. So we have learned through our experience at AJWS that generosity must go beyond charity and self-interest. The wonderful Archbishop, the late Helder Câmara of Recife, Brazil, during the years of military dictatorship, used to say that when he fed the hungry, they called me a saint. But when he asked why they are hungry, they called me a communist. Ruth Messenger and AJWS know that the why question must be asked in all circumstances of poverty and oppression. Charity is an old term, and while admirable, it does not ask the why question. What is underneath this need, this hunger, this poverty? Those questions should be asked by all development workers and all development organizations. But development has been taken over by ideologies from the West primarily that are more like secular religions and tolerate no deviance from orthodoxy. They know no love or humility beyond sympathy and simple pity. Authentic development calls for far more, what I might call emancipatory development, that goes deeper than partnerships, deeper than even solidarity, that seeks a communion with the oppressed, a sacrament of love that spans the geographic and cultural distance between peoples. Long before AJWS, I worked extensively in Central America. Here I was a young Jewish kid living with Roman Catholic priests and sisters from Scarborough Mission Society of Canada and with Maryknoll fathers and sisters. They taught me purely by example the power of communion with the poor. Unlike aid workers, they did not have an airplane ticket in their back pocket or return to the Hilton for happy hour. They lived amongst the poor and with the poor, and they suffered the same fate when the death squads of El Salvador killed the nuns who simply lived by the words of Matthew 25 and who simply believed in restoring the humanity that had been stolen from the poor. That was the vision upon which AJWS was founded, and that ultimately Ruth affirmed here at Brandeis. To be in history, not sidelined by history, to accept the vocation of becoming, as my mentor Paulo Freire once wrote. Like Freire, AJWS embraced and still embraces the vocation of humanization with a deeper, epoch-changing ambition than development. The oppressors, Freire said, who oppress, exploit, and rape by virtue of their power, cannot find in this power the strength to liberate either the oppressed or themselves. Only power, he said, and I will conclude with this, only power, he said, that springs from the weakness of the oppressed will be sufficiently strong to free both. So what a mystery he presents to us. How does power emerge out of weakness? And how do the weak harness that power to free not only themselves, but to create new relationships that protect and nurture a comprehensive and integrated freedom for all in society? Ruth did not, of course, say all of these things. They are my words, but I know Ruth very, very well, and I know that she would agree with them. Thank you.
Now, our professors turn out to be quite modest. That was the great Dr. Larry Simon from the Heller School and Sustainable International Development, where he has a center on this subject. So thank you. Very, very well done.